Question states that do you see these explicit depictions of sex and nudity becoming more common on television and in films? And from my personal experiences, I found this to be true because reflecting on what was learned, I then thought about the question and it said sex and nudity on television, and I found it to be a lot more normal to find that on an everyday basis. So to answer the question, I find this to be, I would have to say yes. And then to back it up, it says sexual content on television from 1997 to 1998, there was 56%. And then from 2004 to 2005, there was 70%. And then as far as children and sexuality in the media will likely grow based upon the sex and nudity on television and in films, yeah, I find this to kind of be directly connected, obviously, because with children they're learning, they're developing, and then when they are to view sexual sex and or nudity, then it kind of then primes them to take apart those specific actions or then words, and then see that as a little bit more normal. For example, if we were talking about shows such as Game of Thrones, where there is a bit of sex and or nudity, then they would see that and then they'll act upon those actions as being normal, which kind of applies directly into cultivation theory as well. So the more that they're viewing the sexual content, then they view that as kind of the reality of it or the real world, and making it seem like it's okay. Because from my personal experiences, any sort of sexual content, rather it being violent and or romantic, there kind of tends to be no background behind it. It kind of just appears, and then it's the next scene. So the next question, or the next part of the question, says that what do you think the consequences are of exposure to sexual content for a particular example that you've mentioned? So relating it back to my personal example, I watch various shows such as Family Guy and or Rick and Morty, where there's a lot of sexual references, and it kind of just puts it out there in more of a comical sense rather than more of a serious manner in talking about it. So if we were to view something that then is perceived to be violent in the sense of sexual behavior, then children and ourselves can then apply to the cultivation theory in the sense that we are going to view that, and then over time we're going to see that as the reality of the reality of the real world, and we would see that and then potentially might act upon those behaviors. So as far as viewing sexual content, it either can trigger two different types of theories, which is that trigger hypothesis, which is exposure to sexual content would trigger them to act on those sexual crimes or sexual behaviors as well. So this you can kind of apply to priming and or cultivation theory, because if we are viewing these sexual contents, then we could be primed based on specific words or specific actions to then want to act on those specific behaviors. And then there's safety valve theory, which kind of does the opposite, where if someone has potential sexual desires or has the desire to act on something that could be particularly inhumane, then viewing these sexual content might actually satisfy that to an extent. But overall, I feel that being exposed to sexual content can potentially be misleading, especially for children, because with the sexual content being exposed on the media, there tends to be a very limited amount of information about risk and responsibilities about the sexual behaviors of it. So when it talks about who is responsible for the effects of sexual content on children, parents and or production companies, I would have to say the production companies more so, because parents, I feel like, as much as they do try to avoid children consuming some sort of negative behaviors or negative actions on television, sexual content is only growing on television, so it's kind of inevitable for them to prevent all sort of aspects to prevent them from viewing that sort of behaviors. But at the same time, the production companies could then act upon that and present sexual content with with information about risk and responsibilities of sexual behavior to then educate the audience, that being children and or adults. So thank you.